Hey everyone, Tina Swithin, author of Divorcing a Narcissist, founder of One Mom's Battle, and CEO of the High Conflict Divorce Coach Certification Program. Fine print, I am not an attorney and I am not qualified to give you legal advice. I'm also not a therapist. We are very much a community of survivors who come together and talk about divorcing a narcissist or child custody issues when a narcissist is involved. But you should always consult with your attorney before you make any new decisions or changes to your case or to your strategy. And I'm hoping to start doing a repeat of what I do on Instagram each week, which is Coffee with Tina. I'm going to re-record for those of you who are not on Instagram, who prefer the YouTube platform, and talk about these important topics that get submitted to us each and every week. And this week's topic is, what do you do when the legal team, including judges, attorneys, parenting coordinators, turn a blind eye to post-separation abuse? So for those of you who are not familiar with our post-separation abuse wheel, you can go to postseparationabuse.com and educate yourself on what exactly we are talking about. But what you will find, what so many people find, is the post-separation abuse wheel is really the playbook of the abuser. And it doesn't matter if you were married to this person or not. And what you'll find is, this playbook continues regardless of whether you left the relationship, a week ago or 10 years ago. The patterns and the threads are very predictable and mostly the same. Obviously, there are some variations that come into play because everybody is different and everybody's situation has different variables. But for the most part, that wheel is very helpful in helping you to understand what you are going through. So as it relates to this question, it's a really big and frustrating topic, and some of the items may matter to family court professionals, and many of them are not even going to register on the scale of importance. When we're looking at that wheel, many of those things, are things we end up having to work through on our therapist couch, and it gets compartmentalized into a box, just for our own personal healing. But for me, the main purpose of the wheel is to help survivors understand and articulate what is happening to them. We know that knowledge is power, and once we understand the playbook of the narcissist, it removes the element of surprise, and many times these issues become more predictable. We know the more prepared we are, the less triggered we are, and we can move from a place of emotion to a place of strategy, which is absolutely critical in these situations. And in a way, understanding these dynamics helps us to desensitize ourselves to their antics. And so on the post-separation abuse wheel, we have a variety of categories. We have counter-parenting, and the courts expect us to co-parent. We know that what is safe for us from a therapeutic standpoint is to get to a place of parallel parenting. And at the same time, you've got the narcissist who is counter-parenting, undermining the safe parents' parenting abilities, decisions. They deny and withhold consent or care for the child's medical or therapeutic needs. They do a lot of things to spite us. And then you have alienation allegations. For those of you who follow me, you will know that I do acknowledge The narcissist will attempt to turn the child against the safe parent. However, I would never use that word to describe what is happening. But what we do know is that alienation allegations are the weapon of the abuser. And it's very much the father's rights movement and what abusers use these allegations to turn the tables and deflect from their own bad behaviors or abuse to avoid taking responsibility and put the blame on you. The children don't want to have a relationship with them, and it's all your fault. It had nothing to do with the fact that they are abusive, neglectful, and unable to actually form a real bond with this child. Somehow it all becomes your fault. So it's very much a legal strategy that is lodged against the safe parent to cast doubt on their credibility. And valid claims of abuse are often labeled as alienation, as a defensive tactic. Then we have neglectful or abusive parenting. This is someone who exposes the children to unsafe content, situations, people. The goal is to create fear or concern for the safe parent. And many times they use intimidation, threats, manipulation to gain compliance. And we know that this type of parent always places their own needs above the needs of the child. They're just incapable of putting anyone else ahead of themselves. So then the next spoke is isolation. This is the smear campaigns, the flying monkeys. Their goal is to discredit the safe parent and destroy their support system and their reputation. This toxic individual will often paint a false narrative, projecting their own issues onto the safe parent. And then we have harassment and stalking. And so many times it goes right up to the legal line without crossing over. This type of person will bombard the healthy parent with an overwhelming number of emails or messages. They can be very manipulative, threatening, abusive. There are some who will monitor social interactions, whereabouts through spyware, tracking devices, all of those things. And this type of person will terrorize and intimidate the safe parent, again, without rising to the level of law enforcement becoming involved. Then you've got the next spoke on the post-separation abuse wheel is legal abuse, and it's misuse of court proceedings to control, harass, intimidate, coerce, exhaust the financial and emotional resources of the safe parent. This is someone who will, they see themselves as above court orders, and they will use other systems like law enforcement, CPS, to create false reports. So many of these tactics are so common. We've also, segues into financial abuse, withholding, mismanaging, or delays in support payments or court-ordered reimbursements. It's just a game to them. They will, while they're sending you to vocational assessments and trying to see how much you're capable of making, they're simultaneously interfering with your job interviews or career advancement opportunities because they don't want you to move forward in life. And when you try to do that, it becomes a threat to them. So there's all of these things. Coercive control is another spoke on the wheel. The whole wheel is coercive control, but the whole goal of the abuser, they create a sense of fear that pervades all elements of the safe parent's life. And These things are painful things to go up against. They can derail us. And so educating on these issues is so important. And let's break this question down. Your attorney, it is the attorney's job to paint a picture for the court so that the patterns are shown and they're undeniable. But what we have to remember is there's an incredible amount of victim blaming in the family court system. Most family court professionals are looking at these situations, looking at us and thinking to themselves, she married this person. This isn't our issue to fix. I hear from clients all the time that their attorney actually said that to them. I've had a family court commissioner actually say that to me. And I'll tell you, at the time, it felt like a huge gut punch. But in hindsight, from a strategy perspective, I'm actually glad that my judge said that to me, because it gave me insight into his mindset. And then I could regroup and re-strategize. I no longer looked at that person as the savior for my kids. I saw it differently because he let me in on what his mindset was like. And, I believe even if you have the best attorney in the entire country, this is still your case, your life, your children. They did not, nor do they currently, walk in your shoes. I really believe it is on us to paint a picture for the attorney, showcase the patterns of behavior, and give them the documentation and the examples or the evidence to build the case. And this circles back again to radical acceptance. We are just case numbers to the majority of attorneys. This is not emotional for them. These are not their children. And I've heard from attorneys in the past that in law school, they're actually taught to turn off their empathy switch. So even if they have one, they are taught to put up boundaries, emotionally distance themselves from these cases. And I can understand why. They do take a toll on professionals who have good intentions. So I see your attorney as your co-pilot, and most of the time they are actually the ones behind the wheel. And I've been doing this for 13 years, both my own case, but then helping others to navigate this. And I see people making really critical errors when they go in and, for lack of a better term, they emotionally vomit on their attorneys. And I'll say I'm guilty of doing this in the beginning when I consulted with attorneys. We are immersed in trauma, not only from the relationship, but now from the post-separation abuse, from the institutional betrayal in the family court system. And we bring with that trauma comes a lot of emotions, because these are our children. And if you weren't struggling with that, I would want to check your pulse and make sure you're alive. Because and so many of us, it has to be a conscious effort to check ourselves on this topic. Something to remember is that the attorney profession itself has very high levels of narcissism. Many are probably diagnosable, which I'm not qualified to do, and my guess is you are not either. And others are just pretty high on the scale. So our emotions brought into this type of environment is like oil and water. We know from personal experience how someone who has high narcissistic traits reacts to us being emotional. I remember if I cried, I remember when my mom died and I was bawling my eyes out, and my ex-husband looked at me after he had stopped to get pizza on the way home and said, "I don't understand why you're so upset. You weren't even that close with her." And it just, you over time, things like that, you start to question if your reactions are normal because you're living in this twilight zone reality. But the reality is, someone who is highly narcissistic is very uncomfortable with emotions. And that's why so many of us are called hysterical or bipolar, or, we're crazy. Um, Consider the source. So, you know, many people go in to their attorney expecting them to navigate this like their therapist would, but our attorneys are not our therapist. And so this is one of the biggest errors I see people make, which is leaning on their attorney in this capacity. When I have worked with a client who is getting ready to file for divorce, and I'm able to educate her on this dynamic and the importance of going into the attorney relationship with a strategy mindset, it makes a world of difference in their relationship with their attorney. And even if you have made these mistakes in the beginning, but you have a good attorney, you may want to have what I refer to as a reset meeting. And this is where you go in and you ask the attorney, I'd like to press the reset button. Can we start over? And this gives you an opportunity to humanize yourself. So what would this type of conversation look like? If it were me going into an attorney's office and wanting to press the reset button, bringing my own dynamics and variables in, it would be, I wanted an opportunity to sit down and have a heart to heart. I'd really like to press the reset button. When I first walked in here last year, I was very naive to this system, and I've learned a lot since we've been working together. And, that this journey doesn't come with a rule book, and I've made some mistakes along the way because of that. But, stepping away from that, I hired you because you are highly respected. I truly do believe that you can help me to protect my children. And I want to understand the system more. I want to show up and be a team player and understand the strategy behind what we are doing. Because if I understand the direction and the strategy, I will be a better team member because I will have less anxiety. And these are my children and my priorities. So unknowns in this realm, because this is unfamiliar or uncharted territory, it does tend to cause me a lot of anxiety. So and I am actively participating in therapy so that I can show up here and be more strategic versus operating from a place of emotion. So, that's a very rough draft. And I would probably go into that type of conversation. I would have had with an attorney after, a 1-year crash course in the system, because I can only imagine how I would have presented back then. And I did present like that. Even though I did represent myself in family court, I consulted with quite a few attorneys. I even hired a few to do limited scope where they worked in the background. So that would have very much been my approach after year one. And obviously, you're going to need to adapt your approach to be truthful to who you are and your situation. But I do think we need to remember several things. We are just case numbers. Humanizing ourselves can go a long way, and showing up and taking accountability for, if we have done things, that the attorney would have, wished we didn't, taking accountability for that, showing up with a strategy mindset and wanting to be a team member can really go a long way to reset that relationship. And this is another area where I can't emphasize enough the importance of working with a high conflict divorce coach, someone who can help you to get into that strategy mindset if you are struggling with it. And just a shout out to the coaches who have gone through my training program. You can connect with one of them by going to HC for high conflict, divorcecoach.com, and then just click find a coach. Their work is invaluable, and they very much become a member of your team. They do not replace your attorney, they do not replace your therapist, but I continually hear from people that had they worked with a divorce coach from the beginning, their cases would have gone a much different direction. So, your attorney doesn't have time to sit down with you and help you to understand the entire system and all of those things, which a divorce coach from our program can do. And another important note, another area of radical acceptance, we should not have to stifle our emotions. Nature intended for us to protect our children, and typically that is seen as a beautiful thing and highly regarded by society. But there's a disconnect. Once you walk through the doors of the family court system, those same natural instincts are now weaponized against us. We're too enmeshed. We're gatekeepers. We're alienators. It's not fair. It's not just. But until the system changes, radical acceptance puts me in the here and now. It doesn't mean I agree with it, but it means I'm not fighting it. And if I'm trying to fight against injustice and unfairness and tackle the whole system, it's going to take away from the energy that I need to protect my children. And that's another critical error that I see people make. So basically, that is the foundation in a perfect world. I also highly recommend watching court proceedings wherever you can. Your local court is the most ideal place. However, neighboring counties are also great if they have Zoom court Zoom or other platforms. A lot of times you can just go to the court website, find out information on court hearings, whether or not they're online. You can call the courthouse and say, I have an interest in observing family court proceedings. Is there an option of watching these online? Or do I need to come in person? And understanding the system in general, but specifically your local system, and making sure that your expectations are in alignment with reality, because we know that the things that are unacceptable to us as healthy parents don't even register for the family court system. They are accustomed to seeing the worst side of humanity and horrific abuse, and they get very calloused and desensitized to these issues. So, we have to keep those things in mind. And I learned that firsthand by sitting in the courtroom, and I would go in there and observe cases that I didn't know either party, and I would put myself in the shoes of the judge. If I were forced to make a call on this case, a decision, what would that be? And, I can understand why so many of them just give 50-50 custody outside of legislation requiring them to. Some of these cases are really hard to know who the healthy parent is. And next, your documentation. Are you thoroughly documenting the patterns of behavior when it comes to the post-separation abuse? Are those things in alignment with the reality of the system and what matters to the system? For example, if we're looking at the post-separation abuse wheel, the reality is the court isn't going to typically care about smear campaigns, flying monkeys, and a lot of times even the stalking or the harassment, because again, so many of these people go right up to the line, but they don't cross over. That's not to take away from how it's affecting us. It weighs on us. I describe it as being assigned your own personal terrorist. It's so much of these things that are happening are so difficult to prove to the court, and it can really take time to show those patterns, and the court tends to give them the benefit of the doubt to an extreme. So for me personally, I would be documenting, showing patterns of behavior that were affecting my children. The neglectful, abusive parenting would be one category. And in that category, I would want to paint a very clear picture for my attorney. I would want my attorney to help me strategize, think outside the box. Again, as a member of the team, humanizing myself as we previously discussed. Maybe this is an area where a private investigator should get involved. Thinking about potential witnesses who could testify about these behaviors, whether they're willingly going to testify or they need to be subpoenaed. Another category on that wheel would be counter parenting. And again, we said, the court expects us to co-parent, yet this person is counter-parenting. And so your goal may be to build a case for a final say in educational decisions or mental health decisions, medical decisions, sometimes, and talk to your attorney about this, but a lot of us go into the system saying, I want legal custody across the board. And a lot of times that isn't realistic, that it takes a lot. It took me 2 years to get full legal custody. So it's very much the chip away mentality where we're tackling these things one by one. And if my ex-husband is constantly creating issues when it comes to me being able to get medical care for my child or educational issues, that may be a subcategory in the legal category that I tackle first. And so I'm slowly chipping away at it, not going in guns blazing, asking for everything, which you can do. I did. But now that I know more about things, I would do it a little bit differently. And so many of the things that other people see as frustrating, such as these relentless email attacks or stonewalling when the other party is just completely ignoring you, I actually, from a strategy standpoint, see those as beautiful things. I would much rather be dealing with a narcissist who sends attacking, threatening emails or completely ignores all of my emails, because that would actually help me to build my case. So it would be my goal to show that this person is impossible to co-parent with and that this is just a game to them. Maybe that my kids are just weapons to them or pawns. So I would want to show a pattern of behavior with examples of the real life doozy emails that come through. But equally important is that we are keeping our side of the street sparkling clean. So many times I'll ask a client, let me read some email communication just so I can get an idea of the type of person you're up against, how you're presenting, and that type of thing. And if I can read communication and walk away believing that the healthy parent doesn't like the toxic parent, it's time to go back to the drawing board in a lot of cases. And again, your attorney is your guide in these situations. However, once I started understanding the system, I knew it was important for me to show up from my authentic place of truth, who I would be if he were healthy. Because I really do believe one of the reasons why my children are safe today and why I was successful in protecting them is because I showed who I was as a person and as a co-parent aside from who he is. But for a long time, I gave him too much power in our communication, and I reacted, or I was triggered, or I snapped back. And in those moments, we aren't showing who we authentically are. I'm giving him my power, and he loves it because that's exactly what he wants. So I'm taking the invitation from him. When it comes to the judge, there are good ones, there are mediocre ones, and there are downright evil, corrupt ones. And we tend to hear more about the evil ones. And I am absolutely grateful for that because thank God the media is finally starting to cover these cases. But even if we are dealing with a good human behind the bench, we know that there's little to no education on these issues and that they do over time become calloused and desensitized. So when I'm speaking about judges for the purposes of today's topic, I'm speaking in terms of the ones who are decent humans. They may be mentally checked out because they hate their job, but they're not evil, they're not corrupt. So, first of all, the judge's decision is largely made based on what your attorney and opposing counsel is putting in front of them. Their hands are often tied by the law, and I saw it in my own case before I really understood the system, where my judge would be like, I want to help, I want to do something. My hands are tied by what has been submitted to me today and what has been requested. So, this is another area I can't emphasize enough, the importance of having an attorney who understands post-separation abuse and is respected by the court system, who understands narcissistic abuse. Who your attorney is can make or break your case. And when we are talking about judges, I often refer to what I see as the grace period. And depending on the judge, that period of time could range from a year to 2.5 years. Most judges have somewhat of a grace period. They expect cases to be filled with conflict, or you wouldn't be there in their courtroom. So for the first year, maybe 2 years, maybe more, they give a lot of grace. And that is so frustrating when our kids are suffering. I remember feeling that every time we walked into the courtroom, I had so much evidence. This is a slam dunk. And even when the judge acknowledged it, he would wipe the slate clean and hand it back to him with a pat on the back, telling him, go try again. Meanwhile, our kids are the ones suffering. So there were so many times I wanted to scream from the rooftops with a bullhorn. And they do tend to excuse a lot of behavior because they believe that once things calm down, once people start their new chapters, everyone will be singing Kumbaya together on Sunday nights. And we know this person is not healthy and is not capable of that because it's about control and it's about hurting us. So once you get to the end of their personal grace period and you're still in the courtroom, that's where they typically start leaning in a little bit closer because they realize that there's an issue. And if your attorney is not familiar with the study out of Santa Clara University, they should be. Whether they, educate their local judges and other attorneys on the study, in general terms or specific to your case, it can be downloaded at NPD for narcissistic personality disorder, npdandlaw.com. So if you are past that grace period, your attorney may want to introduce that study to the court to help them connect the dots on what the issue is. Because as we all know, and as that study points out, it only takes one person to create a high conflict situation. When it comes to the parenting coordinator, a lot of variables here also. What is their job duty? What responsibilities are outlined, and how much power do they have in your case? I see so many mistakes made regardless of what type of family court professional we are talking about. And it's, a lot of us, we have this light bulb moment. We finally figure out this other person is so bad. We finally see it as clear as day. The fog clears, and we expect the other person, whether it's minors counsel, a therapist, a parenting coordinator, we expect them to jump on board and believe how bad this other person is. And I do believe it's important to take a step back and look at this from a strategy perspective. That PC doesn't know either of you. And for all they know, you are the problem. You are the unhealthy person. And it would be really unfair for them to just jump on board and say, yeah, that other person's horrible just because I heard this from Tina. That's just not the way it works. How we present, how we paint the picture, plays a large part in this. There is a bias in the court that moms lie to get a leg up, that we are all just these hysterical, unhealthy women who want to clip the other parent out of their child's lives. So we have to remember that's what we're up against. And that's another area for radical acceptance. It's not fair, but we're in the here and now, and this is what we are facing. So I would personally keep things very child-centric. And I'll give you an example of something that I said to a custody evaluator, because I knew the reality of what I was up against, that, it looked like I was just trying to rid him of our lives. And I said to the evaluator, I was raised by my dad. I came from a divorced family. My dream was for my children to have an intact family and have a close bond and relationship with their father. I know how important that is, and that is what I wanted for them. However, things have taken a turn that I did not expect, and I have concerns about my daughter's safety. And so leading with something like that, again, can humanize you if that is your truth. And, it stands out because most people come in and they're like, this person is so bad, you have to believe me. And we appear unstable when we're doing that. And so then showing specific examples, documentation, that whole quote, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. It's such a frustrating thing to hear, but it's very much our reality. And, this is where I do want to plug the importance of documentation. I often feel like a broken record, and I have a lot of empathy because I know how it feels to be so beaten down and hopeless, trying to hold a job. I was acting as my own attorney. At one point, I was working 2 jobs, and I was a single parent 80% of the time. So when people are telling you document, 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 you want to scream. You probably want to throw rocks at me. So I will say our oxygen mask is always the most important. And there will be times where you just do not have the energy to document. And it's in those times you have to give yourself grace, and it's okay. And then you dust yourself off and you document everything. You never know when someone is going to be appointed who will actually care and be child focused. For me, it wasn't until 5 years into my custody battle, but it was at that juncture that my documentation helped largely to secure a child custody evaluation report that was 100% in our favor. So, in many of these situations, in my child custody evaluation, or if I was working with a PC, I have this visual image of the family court professional standing there holding a paint palette that is clean and empty. And they are they have a blank canvas in front of them, and I am handing them different colors, different tools to use to paint this picture of how this unhealthy individual is affecting our children. And so I hope that some of the information from today has been helpful to you if this is a topic that you're currently facing. So many of us are going through the same difficult things. And I would also like to plug another great resource is the OMB state chapters. As issues like this come up, you can post a question in our state chapters on Facebook, and you can even do it anonymously. And so the goal would be other people who are also in your same state or court system who can chime in and share their perspective or advice. You can connect with one of those at ombchapters.com. If you are in need of help with your documentation system, or maybe you're starting to be accused of gatekeeping or enmeshment, those two words are flashing red lights for me because it tells me that an accusation of alienation is in the pipeline. And so, if you're wanting to safeguard your case from claims of alienation, do it early on. But as soon as you hear those words, stand up straight and really pay attention, because it's scary once things start going that direction. But I do have online courses on safeguarding your case against alienation, my entire documentation system. I share that. Whether you need to go mediate with the narcissist, whether you're struggling with communication, just go to the One Mom's Battle website, onemomsbattle.com, and click online course. There is just a wealth of information, all of the things that, and lots of free resources, all of the things that I wish I would have been equipped with 13 years ago, back in 2009, when I started my own case. So it is my goal to empower you, equip you, so that you can fight for what's in your child's best interest. Until next time, take care. I am Tina Swithin.